In this video, I'm going to continue my Greek monster series. I'm not doing any more single individual monster themed videos, but I'm doing them all together. And I'll probably make one more video after this and I'll be done with my Greek monster series finally. And you might wonder, as a Christian, why in the world I'm doing Greek monsters. It's because I believe God makes a direct reference to most of them in the Bible, even though it's kind of hidden. Alright, but he definitely makes a reference to all of them in the book of Revelation, because he talks about Pergamon and Apollyon, which is the temple of Apollo and the temple of Zeus. And there's nothing in it's not just talking about Zeus and Apollo, it's talking about their temples, and inside these temples are all these heroes fighting these monsters. Okay, so God is making a reference to these heroes and monsters, all right, indirectly, but is making a reference to them. And as far as I know, most Christians are probably not going to be interested in this stuff, but I think it's very important. This is why I believe in the Bible God is constantly trying to tell you, not just the people in the Bible, but you, the reader, to constantly let the Gentiles in. Okay, it's not just talking about the Jewish tradition stuff, it's talking about everyone's traditional stuff. It's all in the Bible. Okay, all these themes are in the Bible, and they're other people's themes too on purpose. Okay, if you want to really do a deep Bible study, you're gonna have to step outside of just the Jewish tradition stuff. All right, because God isn't just using Jewish tradition, he's using everyone's tradition. All right, he says it over and over and over again. All right, so some scholars notice some of this architecture and this old art, and they're noticing that some of these heroes look just like the monsters that they're fighting. This is probably the best example I have found. Notice that this hero, I don't know which one this is, he's fighting a monster, but it looks almost just like him. All right, and they think that's not on accident. Okay, they think when it's talking about fighting these monsters, it's not just talking about fighting other people, it's talking about fighting your inner demons. Yeah, you might want to say, okay, these guys were talking about fighting their inner sin. Okay, because even in the Greek culture, these monsters represented people, not just other people, but themselves. Okay, and it doesn't matter because God really uses that. Okay, obviously, these monsters could represent sin. Obviously, okay. So these Greek monsters represent certain types of sin. Okay, I already went over it in great detail in my individual videos. A Medusa could represent female revenge, or if you want to call it like that. According to the Greeks, though, the reason why she was turned into a snake was because the thing that she was guilty of was doing fornication inside a temple. Okay, so sexual sin, sexual female stuff, manipulation of men. I talked about that in that video. And she has glaucopus, which could also mean that she makes people hallucinate. Okay, she makes people see things that aren't there. All right, so these monsters can represent whole kinds of different things. Okay, and even in the 1900s, they used Medusa to even represent drugs. I have talked about this in this video. Okay, they used to use in the 1900s. They used to use Medusa to represent someone who gave people drugs. And that still ties in with the hallucination stuff, right? Because she has all those snakes on her head, she could represent poison. Okay, yes, I think you're allowed to use people's interpretations of what these monsters represent. The Cerberus represents people who defend the devil, okay, or stand at Satan's throne. And if you're going to add current information to this, it's also hidden in the Bible, perhaps, that these represent atheists. Okay, satyrs traditionally, according to the Greeks, just meant people who got drunk out in the wilderness and danced a lot. It has a lot to do with music and dancing and getting drunk and doing fornication. But it got worse. Just like over time, these monsters got worse and worse, right? Satyrs could represent people who take kids, to take children. Satyrs could represent pansexual. All right, it can represent gay stuff. Lots of people connect satyrs to homosexuality now. Christians do that. Are you allowed to add the current monsters to these old ones? Yes, because just over time these monsters got worse, not better. Okay, so you can totally attack on homosexuality to the satyrs and really the other really bad nasty stuff, not just getting drunk and dancing. Okay, the Cyclops could represent a third eye awakening. It could represent illegal weapon making or satanic weapons, okay, or weapons to kill people, because that's what Cyclopses did according to the Greeks. They made weapons. So yeah, that's, you can associate those kinds of sins to Cyclops. Okay, and I did sea monsters a bit. So according to the Greeks, you being turned into some sort of fish meant that you were a thief. Okay, centaurs represented adulterers and homewreckers. Okay, and minotaurs, which is probably the worst monster of all, represented murder. Alright, that's the word out of their own mouth, or chaos and murder. Okay, now we've established that. So is it possible, now let me have a question for you, is it possible for you to be a mixture of these monsters if they represent evil, okay, which the Greeks were pointing at? Okay, can you be a liar and be an adulterer and be a thief and be a murderer? Of course you can. Can you be a drunk atheist? Yes, you can be a combination of these monsters. And in fact, that's what most people are. Okay? No one, very, very rarely is somebody just guilty of one sin. They're guilty of many sins. They're like big monster hybrids, right? Okay? And so, when it talks about these men wrestling these monsters, it's talking about wrestling their sin and their thief and their murder, and that's inside themselves, okay? You get what I'm saying? Some theologians say that that's what's going on here. And this wrestling metaphor isn't just with the Greeks. You can obviously see it with the Greeks, okay? But even the Persians, they had a wrestling metaphor. Ahura Mazda wrestles airmen, okay? It's a wrestling metaphor that goes back to the beginning of time, and obviously it's in the Bible when God wrestles Jacob, okay? But we're going to talk about the Gilgamesh first, and that goes back to the beginning of time. This theology goes back to the beginning of time. It's literally like wrestling your own inner demons or wrestling your evil twin, okay? Okay, now we're going to talk about the Gilgamesh. And if you read the Gilgamesh, the story of the Gilgamesh is a story about this king. He's in exile mode. He has to leave his kingdom, and he meets his twin monster, okay? It has weird wording, like the gods sent him a beast of his own likeness, okay? So the gods sent him a beast image of himself, okay? And he has to wrestle this beast, and then after they wrestle, they become friends, okay? All right, so or he tames the beast, and obviously you can see. I already talked about this in this very first monster video. Okay, there's parallelism on purpose. There is a story, and there's the story of Esau and his twin brother Jacob, because yes, they are twins because they are born at the same time, and they oppose each other in the wilderness. And probably the most important direct parallelism is when God wrestles Jacob. But it's very important that you realize God refers back to this scene, and sometimes the thing that Jacob wrestles is a man, the thing that Jacob wrestles is an angel, and the thing that Jacob wrestles is God. Well, which one is it? It's because God uses all of it, okay? He uses the philosophy and understanding of Jacob wrestling another guy, of him wrestling an angel, and him wrestling God, okay? God is using all of it. Is God making a possible reference to Jacob wrestling himself? I say sure. Why not? It's probably the same philosophy, okay? Of course, God would use the philosophy and understanding of you wrestling your inner demons or your inner self anyway, okay? Of course, you're allowed to use that. Anyway, why would God be using wrestling terms in the Bible? Well, because according to some people, wrestling is the hardest sport. Okay, wrestling is supposed to be the hardest sport because you use every single inch of your body. Okay, and just to move 1 inch, you have to use your whole body and even your head. Okay, so it's a very hard struggle against God. It's a very hard struggle against the enemy, and it's a very hard struggle against yourself. Of course, God you can use all of it. Okay, so that is why some people think that these Greek gods these heroes are just fighting aspects of themselves. Okay, you get that philosophy and understanding, and I just have to say, you can kind of see this in movies today. Okay, I know sometimes in these movies they're clones and stuff like that, but it's still the same philosophy possibly. Like in the Wolverine movie, the biggest enemy he fights is himself. I know in the movie he's a clone, but give me a break. It's still almost the same thing. And something else I noticed and even in Peter Pan, he wrestles his own shadow. right? He wrestles his shadow. And I just think it's funny, like, even though I can see a little bit of it in some of these earlier Disney movies, okay? Like Scar and Simba almost look just like the same. He's just like a darker version of himself. Just like Jacob and Esau are brothers, they're brothers, okay? I'm saying there's parallelism on purpose, okay? And something that I think is very interesting as well, like even on The Little Mermaid, okay? Did you ever know that Ursula just basically looks like an evil version of The Little Mermaid? They look almost the same, and I don't think any of that is by accident. I think there's parallelism there, okay? Even in Sleeping Beauty, I can only use older of Disney movies because I don't really watch the new ones anymore, okay? Even in Sleeping Beauty, it's something that I've always noticed, even since when I was a kid. I noticed that Sleeping Beauty and Maleficent, Maleficent, that's her name, right? They look at almost exactly the same. It's just like an evil version of Sleeping Beauty. Of course you can use that, sure. Because if you're gonna add something deeper to these movies, you can say they're just wrestling an evil version of themselves, okay? And that's biblical in many different ways. That's why in the Bible, God calls Satan the bronze serpent. Because in the ancient world, bronze serpent, polished bronze is where mirrors come from, okay? They used bronze serpent mirrors as mirrors, okay, in the ancient world. So God is talking about yourself, you're the devil, okay? Of course you can use that. And even according to these, now let's use that. So in this very first monster video, I brought this up. So God wrestles you, you're like a beast, okay, and God tames you, okay? You have to wrestle your own monsters with God, though, okay? And you become like a monster that isn't a monster anymore. So yeah, God can totally use you wrestling with yourself, your inner monster, if you want to call it that, okay? You can wrestle. You wrestling a satyr can mean you're wrestling with your alcoholism. You wrestling a centaur can represent you're wrestling with your adultery, right? With your temptation of adultery. You are wrestling your inner monster. Of course, you can use that. Okay, so these monsters represent sin, and you have to wrestle your own monsters. Okay, now I'm gonna really get into something here. Okay, let's go back to basics. Okay. Because I'm really going to have some really deeper revelation in a minute. Okay, so these monsters represent people, and what are monsters? They're beings with multiple heads. They have multiple limbs sometimes. They have wings. Okay, half the time they have wings. And can dragons be called monsters? Absolutely. If dragons aren't monsters, I don't know what are. Dragons are definitely monsters, right? Sometimes they have multiple eyes, like just in general terms, okay? Monsters have they're part animal and part human, okay? Okay, so if these are monsters, what in the world do you think these are? What are these? What are these? They're monsters. Yes, I know they're angels. They're described as cherubim and seraphims and ophanims. But they look like monsters, right? If these things aren't monsters, I don't know what are. God has monsters. Okay, what does that mean? I have news for you. God has monsters. Okay? God has cherubims, and he has this big eyeball thing. Okay, if these aren't monsters, I don't know what are. These are monsters. What do you mean? What do you mean God has monsters? He has monsters in his palace, okay, in his temple. First of all, God uses these angels to explain a bunch of things. I'm not saying the supernatural version of them don't exist, because they do, obviously. But I'm saying God uses these angels to describe the people and his followers on earth, and they're monsters. That's because these are ex-monsters, okay? They're people. They're called Christians who used to be monsters. That's all Christians are. They're not born super clean, and they weren't just born holy, okay? They weren't born. They were reborn in the body of Christ, okay? Christians are ex-Medusas. They're ex-satyrs. They're ex-centaurs. They're ex-cyclopses. They're former defenders of Satan who've been repented and clean, and now they defend God. They're ex-atheists, okay? Do you see how you can flip these monsters around? Because that's what Christians are. They're flipped monsters. They're reformed monsters, okay? They're ex... You have to watch all those videos. You can use... Christians are ex-monsters, okay? They're ex... They used to be these monsters. You can even view them as well-trained monsters. They're not monsters anymore, okay? Because God uses these cherubims and seraphims as actual people, okay? And the Dead Sea Scrolls, all these animals represent people. Even in the Greek culture, they did that, okay? But God uses these as reformed monsters, okay? Okay, and then just like in the movies, sometimes in the movies, you need another monster to go fight the other monster. And God uses that, okay? Just like when the Egyptians pulled out snakes, God had to pull out his own snake, okay? Just like in the movies, like, I don't know, like Lost World, I guess, to go fight the really bad dinosaur, they had to go get their other dinosaur, okay? Just like, I don't know, like in Terminator. In Terminator, you have to go get a good Terminator to go fight the bad Terminator, okay? You have to go get a reformed monster to go fight the actual bad monsters, okay? Or wrestle them. And then you wrestle them, and hopefully they become reformed monsters. And they become Christians. You get what I'm saying? Or get where I'm going at that? So it's not just about wrestling yourself. It's wrestling your evil brothers who need to be reformed, okay? No joke. And it's so crazy because even in the Greek myths, they do that. The only way the sea monster was destroyed is if you got Medusa. In the centaurs, okay, the centaurs means bull slayer. You have to, in order to defeat a minotaur, you have to go get a centaur. Okay, you can even in these Greek myths, you have to go get one of the other monsters to fight to actually kill the other monsters. Okay, and even in real life, you can see that. Okay, ex-drug addicts, I guess, could be considered Medusas or satyrs if you're an alcoholic. Okay, because they used to use Medusa to explain people who are addicted to things. Okay, what do ex-alcoholics and ex-drug addicts do? They go to AA and they talk to other ex-drug addicts and ex-alcoholics, and they get reformed. Okay, because you need someone who knows that sin to help you come out of your own sin. Do you get the deeper meaning in that? The deeper philosophy you can use with these monsters? Okay, that's why God uses. That's one of the many, many, many reasons God puts monsters in the Bible, and they're not bad. God even says he has dragons. Are dragons monsters? God literally just says in plain English he has dragons. Okay, that's because you need a monster to go get to help the other monster, a reformed monster. Okay, you get where I'm going with that? Even in the labyrinth myths, and the only way that the hero was able to go through the labyrinth was because he had help from another person who already been through the labyrinth. You get what I'm saying? Can you add a Christian perspective to this? Of course. Okay? Christians are people who have already been through through those rivers of chaos. Okay, they've already come out of it, so you can listen to their helpful hints of how to come to Christ. Okay? Or you can just do it yourself and get lost forever. Okay? You need help from Christ, you need help from the Holy Spirit, and you need help from other Christians who've already been through it. Okay? Even with false religions, you can do that. Would it not be good for you to get an ex-Muslim to save the Muslims, or an ex-Catholic like myself to go and save and warn the current Catholics? You have to go. It's really best to go get somebody who's more familiar with that sin, who's been living in that sin and came out of it through Christ, to go help people who are still living in that same sin. Okay, you have to get people who are familiar with being a thief and being a liar and being a murderer and being an adulterer, someone who's familiar with that sin, to bring other people out of it. Okay, that's why you can totally use these monsters fighting each other. Okay, if you're going to use these monsters as just people. Okay? Alright. So, I think that's pretty good. I think the best example ever, as well, might as well just do it. The X-Men. You have to go get the X-Men to go fight the mutants. Okay? You have to go get the reformed X-Men the X-Men, the Christian X-Men, to go save and help the other X-Men, okay? And help the other people, right? That's what the true definition of what an X-Men is in God's eyes, okay? You want to be an X-Men, you have to come through, you have to reform, you have to wrestle your own monster in the wilderness, and with God, okay? And then you're going to have to, when you're reformed, you are going to have to go with God and go wrestle the other monsters. And is it going to be hard? It's going to be really hard. But since you've been through it all, you should know very well, you should know all the tactics you need to save these people. Okay, you get where I'm going with that? It's going, even after you're saved, you're going to have to go through in the wilderness and wrestle all the monsters, because you're going to spend your whole rest of your life trying to save everyone else with God. You get what I'm saying? That struggle in the wilderness is always going to be happening until you die, anyway. So yeah, this represents a person who has wrestled their multiple heads, okay? Who has wrestled their multiple monsters and conquered them, okay? And they're in league with each other. They don't oppose each other anymore, okay? God uses these angels to explain actual people too, all right? And I know people are not going to like that. They're like, the people just assume this is just some weird creature, and they don't think about it. They don't think it means anything when God is literally explaining a million different things, okay? And you can see that with Mary Magdalene. Mary Magdalene said she had struggled with 7 spirits, okay? But she conquered her spirits with God, with Jesus, because you can't do it by yourself, okay? She represents this. She represents someone who's conquered her 7 heads. You get what I'm saying? She wrestled and conquered her inner thief, or her inner satyr, her inner saint, her inner adulterer, okay? You get what I'm saying? It's very rarely just one. No one is just guilty of one of them. They're all mixed, right? So, if you're going to add philosophical stuff to the book of Revelation, when you fight Leviathan, it's not just you fighting literal demons, okay? It's you fighting your inner demons, okay? God uses the fighting of Leviathan to explain a million different things. You're fighting your inner turmoil, okay? You're wrestling your inner sin, okay? And that's exactly what's going on in the Temple of Pergamon and the Temple of Apollo, okay? It's a big wrestling match. If you look really closely, it's like the WWF, okay? It's a really, really big wrestling match. If you wrestling other people, you wrestling your inner demons, and everything, okay? It's all of it, okay? And something I wanted to bring up too, okay? You have to realize that God has been trying to use people's stuff to save them. And with the Greeks, you being part animal was very bad, okay? You being animal, it was very degrading to consider yourself part animal. But in some religions, like the Egyptians, okay, you being part animal was a sign of divinity, okay? It was a sign that you were progressing, okay? That's why God uses animals as good things. You being part animal as a good thing, okay? And this is what God did, okay? So I'm going to repeat myself. The Greeks, you had to wear white fine linen. They did not believe that you should wear animal skin. Okay, you had to wear white linen. You had to wear fine. You had to wear fine cloth. Okay, you're not supposed to wear animal fur. You're not supposed to wear animal stuff. Okay, but in some religions, like the Egyptians and some of these other religions, okay, you dressing up in animal skin meant that you were holy. Okay. So this is what God did. He did the best of both worlds with Christ. That's why Christ really pushes the wool, okay? He pushes the sheepskin because it's technically white fine linen and it's animal's fur. It's best of both worlds. That's why towards the end of the Bible he pushes the wool towards Christ, because that's satisfying both. It's satisfying, but it's brilliant, right? It's satisfying the animal skin, and it's satisfying the white fine linen. It's both, right? God did both with Jesus, okay? That's why God really pushes the wool with Jesus, because it's both, right? All right. So please think about this stuff, guys, and thank you.